In this video, we're going to talk about the settlement APIs, which allow you to either unilaterally move assets in dollars from one account to another, or bilaterally settle a trade between two accounts with assets in dollars moving in opposite directions. This is the starting state of our sandbox right now. You can see there's no dollars and there's no BTC in this account. To move cash, you're going to use the /v2 account cash transfers endpoint. We're going to send a post request, including the amount that we want to send, the from account ID, and the to account ID. You can also include an optional reference string that's human readable for identification purposes. One thing to note, these transactions settle immediately in both the sandbox and in production. If we were to go back to the sandbox and view this account, we see it now has $100,000, where before it had zero. To move assets, you're going to use /v2 internal asset transfers endpoint, and we're going to send a post request with the unit count quantity of the asset that you want to move, the from account ID, the to account ID, the asset ID to specify which asset you're moving, and again, an optional reference string. An additional field here is hot, true or false. False is the default value, which works on the warm balance in the wallets. If you have hot balance available, you can also use this API call to move hot balances from one account to another. There's no difference in how the internal action occurs in a hot versus warm transaction for assets. Again, you see the status of this is immediately settled. And if we go back to the sandbox and look at the assets, we can see there's now Bitcoin in this account, where before there was none. To show a bilateral movement, we're going to initiate a trade to buy an asset. So this is accomplished through a post request to the /v2 trades endpoint. The attributes are going to contain two subsections, one for the initiator of the trade and one for the acceptor. In this case, the initiator is specifying his account ID, currency type, and dollar amount. So this initiator is paying $25,000. The acceptor, specifying the account ID for that account, the asset ID, and the amount of the asset that is going to be moved. So in this case, this trade represents the purchase from one account to the other of one asset unit, which we're using BTC in this case, for $25,000. The expires at field is a optional field that can be used but is not required. This will allow the trade to expire automatically at a certain time and date. So here we see the status of this transaction is pending. In this case, both in production and in sandbox, an action needs to be taken to settle this trade. This result is just a summary of the transaction that we submitted via the API. To settle the trade, we're going to make a call, a post request to /v2 trades with the trade ID that we just created and the additional path /settle. Now we can see this transaction is settled. If we go back to the sandbox, we can see this is the initial state of the two accounts. So this account had 10 BTC before we started. When we click on this account, we see it now has an additional $25,000 in the cash balance and one less BTC in the BTC balance. We view the actual transactions. There's a trades folder here where we can see the transaction between the two accounts. $25,000 for 1 Bitcoin. Likewise, a sell transaction can be initiated just by reversing the location of who's offering the asset and who's offering the dollars. So in this case, the initiator is specifying an asset ID and the amount that they want to buy. The acceptor is setting a currency type and offering the amount that they're willing to trade for that 1 BTC. Again, the expires at is a optional field. We execute this trade. Status is pending. You also have the ability to cancel a trade. This looks very similar to settling the trade. You use the trade ID that was created in the initial transaction to create the trade in a pending state. And instead of /settle, we're looking at /cancel. So in this case, we can go ahead, send a request, and we see the status is canceled. So now this trade has been rejected and will not be settled between the two accounts. These 4 API calls, the initiating of a trade, dollars for asset, or asset for dollars, you can consider them a buy or sell, or you can just look at them as a trade of one thing for another. And then step 2 is settling that trade or canceling that trade.